While the wife was away, a pregnant mistress moved in until an unexpected FBI raid unleashed chaos. Michael Caldwell's hands trembled as he poured himself a third scotch, neat. The amber liquid caught the dying sunlight, reminding him of her eyes. Amber's eyes. God, even her name was a warning he'd ignored. 15 years of marriage to Vanessa had dissolved into routine, but now, pure electricity. His lips curved into a smile, then instantly flattened as his wife's voice echoed from their wedding photo on the mantel. "I'll only be gone 6 months, Michael. We can handle anything for 6 months." The scotch burned his throat as his phone lit up with a message that made his blood run cold. "The test is positive. We need to talk now." Michael's world tilted on its axis, exhilaration, terror, and something like hope all wrestling in his chest. How had he arrived at this moment? And more importantly, what would happen when 2 separate lives crashed inevitably together under one roof? The doorbell rang. Too late for second thoughts now. Before we dive deep into this heartfelt story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's free, as your support helps us create more meaningful stories for you. Enjoy the story. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs as he pulled open the front door. There stood Amber Rhodes, her cheeks flushed despite the evening chill, golden hair falling in waves around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that held him captive. Fierce yet vulnerable, demanding yet pleading. "Were you going to answer my text?" Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the confidence she tried to project. "I was just—" Michael stepped back, inviting her in with a gesture that felt both natural and treasonous in the home he shared with Vanessa. "Come in, please." Amber hesitated at the threshold, her gaze sweeping over the gleaming hardwood floors, the tasteful artwork, Vanessa's touches everywhere. For a moment, Michael saw his home through Amber's eyes, a museum to a marriage he was actively betraying. "Nice place," she murmured, arms wrapping protectively around her still flat stomach. The gesture wasn't lost on Michael. 6 months ago, they were celebrating their anniversary, Michael thought, remembering how Vanessa had looked across the candlelit table, her dark eyes shining with something that had once been love, but had cooled into comfortable affection. 15 years, she had said, raising her champagne flute. Who would have thought we'd make it this far? Was there resignation in her voice that night? Had she sensed even then that something was broken between them? The memory dissolved as Amber's voice pulled him back to the present. "I didn't know where else to go." Her voice was smaller now, the bravado evaporating. "My landlord found out I'm pregnant. He's terminating my lease. Some morality clause buried in the fine print." Michael guided her to the kitchen, his mind racing. 3 weeks. Vanessa had been gone only 3 weeks on her humanitarian mission, and already his careful compartmentalization was collapsing. "When did you find out?" He poured her a glass of water, noticing how her fingers shook slightly as she accepted it. "Yesterday. I took 3 tests to be sure." Amber's eyes never left his face, studying his reaction. "It's yours, Michael. There hasn't been anyone else." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Michael's mind flashed to the fertility specialists, the years of disappointment, Vanessa's tears when yet another treatment failed. How cruel that this had happened so easily, so accidentally, with someone else. "I know it's yours," he said quietly, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "That's not what I'm questioning." Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, the weather shifting as dramatically as his life was in this moment. Amber's shoulders relaxed slightly, tension draining from her posture. "What are you questioning, then?" she asked. Michael ran his hands through his salt and pepper hair, the gesture betraying his inner turmoil. "Everything else. Where we go from here. What this means." Amber's laugh was sharp, almost bitter. "I'm not asking you to leave your wife if that's what you're worried about." But wasn't that exactly what worried him? That somewhere in the recesses of his mind, in the honest parts he rarely visited, he had already considered it. "I'm going to have this baby, Michael." Her voice was suddenly steel, all vulnerability vanishing. "With or without you. I just thought you should know." She stood to leave, but Michael grasped her wrist gently. The contact sent electricity through his fingertips, a physical reminder of what had drawn him to her in the first place, that inexplicable chemistry that had been missing from his marriage for years. "Stay," he said, the word falling from his lips before he could reconsider. "Just for tonight. It's pouring, and we need to talk about this properly." What he didn't say, "Vanessa won't call tonight. She's in a Syrian refugee camp with spotty satellite service." What he didn't acknowledge, the relief he felt knowing this conversation wouldn't be interrupted by his wife's virtual presence. Amber studied his face, weighing his offer. "One night," she agreed finally, "and tomorrow we make a plan." One night became two. Two became a week. The guest room slowly transformed as Amber's belongings migrated from her apartment. First a toothbrush, then clothes, then the books she couldn't sleep without. Michael told himself it was temporary just until she found a new place, just until they figured things out. His phone calls with Vanessa became exercises in omission. Yes, everything was fine at home. No, nothing interesting had happened. The house was exactly as she had left it. Lies piled upon lies, building a foundation as unstable as his emotions. "You should tell her," Amber said one evening, her hand resting on her stomach where the slightest curve was now visible. They sat on the back patio, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "Before someone else does." Who would tell her? Michael asked, but the question plagued him long after Amber had gone to bed. The answer arrived the next morning in the form of James Russo, his business partner and oldest friend, standing on his doorstep at 7 a.m. with coffee and an expression that made Michael's stomach drop. "We need to talk," James said, his eyes moving past Michael to the woman descending the stairs in a robe. Vanessa's robe. Preferably alone. The silence in Michael's home office felt suffocating. James paced by the window, coffee forgotten on the desk between them. Michael's throat had closed up, excuses dying before they reached his lips. 6 weeks, James finally said, turning to face Michael. "Vanessa's been gone 6 weeks, and you've already moved your girlfriend in? Are you trying to blow up your life?" Michael flinched. Hearing it stated so plainly made his actions sound reckless, desperate. Maybe they were. "It's complicated," he managed, the understatement of the year hanging pathetically in the air. "Complicated?" James's laugh held no humor. "Michael, I saw her wearing Vanessa's robe. She's pregnant. Please tell me that's not—" "It's mine." The words felt strange on Michael's tongue, terrifying and oddly freeing. "The baby is mine." James collapsed into the leather chair across from Michael, rubbing his temples where silver threaded through dark hair. The resemblance between the two men was striking in that moment. Both successful, both nearing middle age, both carrying the weight of secrets. "Does Vanessa know?" James asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Michael shook his head, shame burning hot across his face. "I haven't figured out how to tell her. How do you tell your wife of 15 years that you're having a baby with someone else? After all the treatments, all the disappointments." The unspoken question hung between them. After all your failures to give her the one thing she wanted most. Outside the closed office door, floorboards creaked. Amber, listening. Michael felt the walls of his carefully compartmentalized life beginning to crumble. "You need to end it," James said, leaning forward, his voice urgent. "Send the girl away. Pay whatever it takes. Vanessa doesn't deserve this." A flash of anger surged through Michael, surprising in its intensity. Her name is Amber, not the girl. And it's not that simple. "Because of the baby?" "Because—" Michael paused, forcing himself to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. because I have feelings for her. Real feelings. James stared at him, disappointment etched across features hardened by years of tough business decisions. Michael had seen that look directed at failing investments, never at him. "You're going to lose everything," James warned. "The firm, your reputation. Do you really think our clients will trust a man who can't even honor his marriage vows?" A bitter smile twisted Michael's lips. "Is that what this is about? The business?" "Don't be naive. Everything is connected." James stood, straightening his tailored suit. "Fix this, Michael, before it's too late." The front door closed with a decisive click, leaving Michael alone with choices that suddenly seemed impossible. When he emerged from his office, Amber stood in the kitchen, Vanessa's robe replaced by jeans and a sweater that hugged her slightly rounded stomach. "He knows," she said simply, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Who else will find out before you make a decision?" Michael crossed to her, needing the physical connection, but she stepped back. "Don't," she whispered. "Not unless you mean it." "Mean what?" "This." She gestured around the kitchen, to the breakfast dishes they'd shared, to the prenatal vitamins on the counter, to the ultrasound picture now magneted to Vanessa's immaculate refrigerator. Us. In the harsh morning light, reality clarified. What had begun as an escape, exciting lunches, stolen afternoons in hotel rooms, the thrill of secrecy, had evolved into something dangerously close to a life. Their life. Michael's phone chimed. Vanessa. A video call request that made his stomach tighten with dread. "Take it," Amber said, already retreating. "I'll make myself scarce." Guilt clawed at his insides as he accepted the call, plastering on a smile that felt like a grimace. Vanessa's face appeared, tired but radiant against the backdrop of a makeshift medical tent. Purpose had always suited her better than domestic life. "Michael, sorry I missed our call yesterday. Things have been chaotic here." Her dark eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "How are you holding up without me?" The lie came easily. "Missing you. The house feels empty." Behind him, a door closed softly as Amber disappeared into the guest room. Their room now. The irony wasn't lost on Michael. The house had never felt less empty. "I have news," Vanessa continued, excitement coloring her voice. "They've asked me to extend my stay. The work we're doing here is making a real difference." Michael's relief was immediate and crushing. More time. More borrowed moments in this strange interim life. "That's wonderful," he said, meaning it despite everything. Vanessa had always been at her best when helping others. "How much longer?" "Another 3 months. I know it's a long time." "You should do it," he said quickly, too quickly. "If it's important to you." Something flickered across Vanessa's face. Doubt, perhaps, or the shadow of suspicion. But then she smiled, and the moment passed. "I knew you'd understand. You always do." The connection faltered, her image freezing. "I'm losing signal. Love you." The screen went dark before he could respond. Just as well. What would he have said? The words that had once been automatic now stuck in his throat like shards of glass. Later that night, Amber curled against him in bed, her head on his chest. The steady thump of her heartbeat against his side felt like a second conscience. "What happens when she comes home?" Amber asked, giving voice to the question that haunted their every moment together. Michael stared at the ceiling, tracing the shadow patterns cast by moonlight filtering through the curtains. "I don't know." "That's not good enough anymore." She propped herself up on one elbow, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I'm not asking for promises, Michael. I'm asking for honesty." Her hand guided his to her stomach, where the slightest flutter of movement could now be felt. Their child. The reality of it struck him anew each time. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he whispered. "But it did happen. We happened." Her eyes glistened in the darkness. "And now, We have to decide what's next. Michael thought of James's warning, of Vanessa's trust, of the life he'd built over 15 years. He thought of the emptiness that had driven him to Amber's arms in the first place and the unexpected fullness he'd found there. "Stay," he said finally, the decision crystallizing. "Not just for now. Stay." The word hung between them, weighted with possibility and consequence. Neither of them spoke the obvious truth. Staying meant Vanessa would have to go. One family built on the ashes of another. Amber's kiss tasted of salt and promise. "Okay," she breathed against his lips. "I'll stay." Neither saw the car parked across the street, or the camera lens capturing their silhouette in the bedroom window. Neither knew that their private decision had just become evidence in a case that would soon explode their carefully constructed world. Days melted into weeks with frightening ease. Michael and Amber fell into a routine that felt disturbingly natural. Morning coffee on the patio, evening walks around the neighborhood, weekend trips to baby boutiques where Michael's credit card took a beating. The guest room transformed into a nursery, pale yellow walls replacing Vanessa's preferred slate gray. A crib, assembled by Michael's inexperienced hands, stood where a writing desk had once been. Vanessa's things migrated to closets and drawers, making space for Amber's growing collection of maternity clothes. If neighbors noticed, they kept their observations to whispers behind closed doors. Michael convinced himself that discretion was still possible, that he could manage the inevitable collision of his two worlds when the time came. The nursery was half finished when the first sign of trouble appeared. Michael Caldwell. The woman at the door wore a tailored pantsuit and an expression that suggested she rarely heard good news. "I'm Special Agent Diana Torres, FBI." Michael's mouth went dry. Behind him, Amber froze in the hallway, one hand protectively covering her now prominent belly. 6 months along and radiant, despite the fear that suddenly clouded her features. "What is this about?" Michael managed, blocking the agent's view of Amber with his body. Agent Torres's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I need to ask you some questions about Caldwell Financial Partners. May I come in?" The floor seemed to tilt beneath Michael's feet. "Do I need a lawyer?" "That's entirely your decision, Mr. Caldwell." Her gaze flicked past him, noting Amber's presence despite his efforts. "But this is just a preliminary conversation." Preliminary. The word carried implicit threat. This is just the beginning. Michael led Agent Torres to his office, closing the door on Amber's worried expression. His hand trembled as he offered the agent a seat. "We've received some concerning reports about your investment practices," Torres began, declining to sit. She remained standing, a power play that wasn't lost on Michael. "Specifically regarding the Meridian Fund." The Meridian Fund, Michael's flagship investment vehicle, the cornerstone of his practice, the source of the wealth that had built this house and the life inside it, the fund that hadn't performed as advertised for nearly 3 years. "What kind of reports?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice level. "Inconsistencies in reported returns. Unusual cash movements." Torres watched his face with cold precision. "Several of your clients have raised concerns." Clients. Plural. Michael's mind raced through possibilities. Who had looked too closely at the quarterly statements? Who had compared notes? "There must be some misunderstanding," he said, the lie tasting like copper. "Our returns have been consistent for years. I'd be happy to provide documentation." Documentation that James had helped him falsify. Documentation that would crumble under forensic accounting. Torres nodded, as if his response confirmed something. "We'll need to see all of it. My team will be in touch with a formal request." She handed him a business card. "In the meantime, I suggest you don't leave town." The front door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. Michael sat motionless at his desk, the card burning between his fingers like a live coal. When Amber appeared in the doorway, her face was ashen. "What did she want?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to face. How much should he tell her? How much would make her leave? "It's a misunderstanding," he said, the lie coming easier the second time. "Nothing to worry about." But later that night, alone in his office with the lights off and a glass of scotch in hand, Michael faced the truth he'd been running from for years. The Meridian Fund was a house of cards built on fabricated returns and money shifted between accounts. New investments paid old investors, a classic Ponzi scheme disguised by complex financial instruments and James's creative accounting. It had started small, a bad quarter covered up to avoid alarming clients, then another, then a calculated deception that grew until it consumed everything. The money was mostly gone, spent maintaining their lifestyle, funding the firm's expansion, covering Vanessa's charity work. His phone buzzed with a text from James. "We need to talk, now." The restaurant was nearly empty, a dimly lit steakhouse on the edge of town where business was conducted in hushed tones. James looked like he'd aged a decade in the week since they'd last spoken, his eyes sunken with exhaustion or fear. "Torres came to see me too," James said without preamble, fingers drumming nervously on the tablecloth. "They know, Michael. They know about all of it." Cold dread pooled in Michael's stomach. "How much time do we have?" "Days, maybe less." James's voice cracked. "I've spoken to a lawyer. There might be a way to minimize the damage. If we cooperate, if we give them what they want." "Which is?" "Someone to blame." James met his gaze steadily. "They want the mastermind, Michael. The one who started it all." The implication hung in the air between them, an accusation and an opportunity. Memory flashed to that first falsified report, Michael's idea, James's reluctant execution. "You're throwing me under the bus," Michael said, realization dawning. "After everything we've built together." "I have a family," James hissed, leaning forward. "Children. What do you have? A pregnant mistress in your wife's house? You've already blown up your life. I'm trying to salvage mine." The betrayal stung worse than Michael had anticipated. He'd expected loyalty from James, the only person who knew all his secrets, both personal and professional. "We're both guilty," Michael said, voice low and dangerous. "If I go down, you're coming with me." James sat back, a strange calm settling over his features. "That's where you're wrong. Check your email when you get home. I've been documenting everything for months. Insurance, I called it." "Insurance against what?" "Against you becoming a liability." James stood, dropping cash on the table for a drink he hadn't touched. "I'm sorry, Michael, truly. But some of us have to live with the consequences of your choices." Michael drove home in a fog of betrayal and panic, the headlights of passing cars blurring through unshed tears. His phone buzzed repeatedly, emails pouring in. James making good on his threat, the evidence mounting. He pulled into the driveway of the home that suddenly felt like a prison. Through the front window he could see Amber on the couch, hand resting on her belly, laughing at something on television. Unaware that their world was about to implode. His phone rang. Vanessa's name on the screen sent a jolt of terror through him. "Michael?" Her voice sounded strange, tight with emotion. "I'm coming home. My flight lands tomorrow morning." The walls closed in. No more time. No more pretending. The two women in his life were on a collision course, and he stood frozen between them, watching the crash unfold in slow motion. "Is everything okay?" he asked, knowing the answer before she spoke. "No," Vanessa said simply, "but we'll discuss it when I get there. Sleep well, Michael." The line went dead. Behind him, blue and red lights flashed at the end of his street. Blue and red lights flooded the street with pulsing urgency. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched the police cruiser slow, then continue past his driveway to stop 3 houses down. A domestic dispute, not his world crumbling, not yet. The reprieve was temporary. He knew it with bone-deep certainty. Inside, Amber looked up as he entered, her smile fading when she saw his expression. What happened? Michael sank onto the couch beside her, the weight of his deception suddenly unbearable. Vanessa's coming home. Tomorrow. Amber's hand flew to her throat, eyes widening with shock. Tomorrow? Why didn't you tell me sooner? I just found out. He ran his hands over his face, feeling the stubble of a day that had aged him years. She called from the airport. She knows something's wrong. Did she say that? Does she know about us? Panic edged Amber's voice as her hand moved protectively to her stomach. I don't know what she knows. The half-truth tasted bitter. He suspected Vanessa knew everything. About Amber, about the baby, perhaps even about the investigation. Why else cut her mission short? What are we going to do? Amber asked, the question hanging between them like a live wire. We. The word twisted in Michael's chest. There was no we anymore, only the wreckage of choices made in selfishness and fear. Pack your things, he said finally, unable to meet her eyes. You need to go. Tonight. Amber recoiled as if he'd slapped her. Go where? I gave up my apartment. Everything I own is here. I'll get you a hotel room, just for a few days, until I can explain things to Vanessa. Another lie. There would be no explanation that could salvage this situation. You're choosing her. Amber's voice hardened, tears threatening but held back by fury. After everything, you're sending me away like some dirty secret. It's not that simple. It is that simple. She stood abruptly, one hand bracing her lower back where pregnancy strained her small frame. You promised me, Michael. You said we were building something real. Had he? The weeks blurred together in his memory. Declarations made in moments of passion. Plans constructed in the safety of Vanessa's absence. None of it had been real. All of it built on a foundation of lies that was now collapsing. The FBI is investigating the firm, he admitted, the words spilling out like blood from a wound. Fraud, embezzlement. I could go to prison. Amber stared at him, color draining from her face. What are you talking about? The money, the lifestyle, the house. He gestured around them at the evidence of his deception. None of it was real. I've been moving client funds around for years, falsifying returns. James and I both. James knows? Her voice had dropped to a whisper. James is going to testify against me. The betrayal still stung, fresh and raw. He's been collecting evidence, building a case to save himself. Understanding dawned on Amber's face, horror replacing anger. The agent who came today, she wasn't here about us. No. At least he could offer that small truth. She doesn't care about my marriage. She cares about the millions of dollars I've stolen. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. A wedding gift from Vanessa's parents, marking time in a marriage built on shared dreams that had somehow veered so terribly off course. Millions? Amber finally asked, voice small. How much exactly? The question hit like a physical blow. Not shock at his crimes, not outrage at his moral failures, just a cold calculation of his worth, or lack thereof. Does it matter? He asked, bitterness rising like bile. It's all gone. Everything. Amber's hand moved from her belly to her pocket, withdrawing her phone. Michael watched with growing dread as she scrolled through contacts, then paused. Who are you calling? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Someone who can help me? Her thumb hovered over the screen. Since you clearly can't. Don't. Michael reached for the phone, but Amber stepped back, keeping it out of reach. Please. Whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking about our child." Her voice cracked on the last word, the first genuine emotion she'd shown since his confession. "I'm thinking about what happens when you go to prison and there's nothing left, no money, no home, nothing." The realization crashed over Michael like ice water. Amber had never loved him. She'd loved the life he represented, the financial security, the home, the stability, all illusions carefully crafted and maintained at devastating cost. "So that's it?" he asked, a hollow laugh escaping. "Now that I'm broke and facing prison, you're done?" "Don't you dare judge me." Amber's eyes flashed with genuine anger. "You lied to everyone. Your wife, your clients, me." Her voice broke on the last word. "You made me believe we had a future." The truth of her words struck him silent. What right did he have to judge her motivations when his own had been so corrupt? "I'm sorry," he said finally, meaning it perhaps for the first time. Not for getting caught, not for the consequences, but for the damage he'd caused to lives that had intersected with his own. "I truly am." Amber's face softened slightly, a glimpse of the woman he thought he'd known. "I believe you, but it doesn't change anything." She disappeared upstairs, the sound of drawers opening and closing marking the dismantling of their shared fantasy. Michael sat in the silence of his living room, surrounded by photographs of a marriage he'd destroyed and evidence of a love affair that had never been real. His phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line froze his blood. "Search warrant approved." Tomorrow morning, his home would be invaded, his secrets exposed, his life picked apart by strangers in suits and uniforms. And Vanessa would arrive to witness his public humiliation. The thought of Vanessa's face, her disappointment, her pain, sent him to his knees. 15 years of shared history reduced to this moment of absolute failure. She deserved better. She always had. His phone rang again, an unknown number. Michael answered without thinking, desperate for any distraction from the approaching storm. "Mr. Caldwell," Agent Torres's voice was professionally detached. "I wanted to give you a courtesy call. We'll be executing a search warrant at your residence and office tomorrow at 9 a.m. I suggest having your attorney present." "My wife is coming home tomorrow," he said, the non sequitur surprising even him. A pause on the line. Then, unexpectedly, a hint of compassion. "I'm sorry to hear that. The timing is unfortunate." Unfortunate? The understatement of the century. Michael laughed, a sound bordering on hysteria. "Is there someone I can call for you, Mr. Caldwell?" Torres asked, professional concern replacing momentary humanity. "You sound distressed." "I'm fine," he lied, the words automatic now, "just preparing for tomorrow." That would be wise. The line went dead. Upstairs, Amber was still packing, the sounds of her preparations a funeral march for the life they'd pretended to build. Michael stared at his phone, thumb hovering over Vanessa's contact. What could he possibly say to prepare her for what she would find? The doorbell rang, startling him from his paralysis. Through the peephole he saw James standing on his porch, face gray with strain. "We need to talk," James said when Michael opened the door. "One last time before everything changes." James stepped into the foyer, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and desperation. His eyes darted to the staircase where the sound of Amber's packing continued. "She's leaving?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "What does it matter to you?" Michael led him to the kitchen as far from Amber as possible. "You've already decided to sacrifice me." James winced, having the decency to look ashamed. "It's not personal, Michael. It's survival." "It feels pretty damn personal from where I'm standing." Michael leaned against the counter, exhaustion seeping into his bones. "What do you want? Haven't you done enough?" James placed a manila envelope on the kitchen island. "Immunity papers. Torres offered me a deal, full cooperation in exchange for minimal charges. Congratulations! The bitterness in Michael's voice could have corroded steel. You get to keep your life while mine burns to the ground. That's why I'm here. James pushed the envelope toward Michael. There's still a way out, for both of us. Michael stared at the envelope, suspicion crawling up his spine. What are you talking about? They don't have everything yet, just enough to get the warrants. James lowered his voice, glancing toward the stairs. If certain evidence disappeared before tomorrow's raid, if certain accounts were emptied and certain records erased. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. You want me to run. There's money in an offshore account they don't know about, enough to start over somewhere. James's eyes held a desperate plea. If you disappear, they'll focus on you, the mastermind who fled justice. It strengthens my story. You son of a bitch! Michael's laugh was hollow. You're not here to help me. You're here to make sure I become the fall guy. I'm here because we were friends once, James countered, hurt flashing across his features. Because despite everything, I don't want to see you in prison for 20 years. The offer hung between them, tempting in its simplicity. Run. Start over. Escape the reckoning that awaited him at dawn. What about Amber? Michael asked, the question surprising even himself. The baby? James shrugged. Take her with you. Or don't. That's your choice. Choice. As if anything in Michael's life had been truly chosen rather than stumbled into through weakness and fear. The affair, the fraud, all of it a series of evasions rather than decisions. And Vanessa? The name felt foreign on his tongue after weeks of avoiding it. What happens to her when I disappear and the FBI seizes everything? She's smart, resourceful. James wouldn't meet his eyes. She'll land on her feet, eventually. Upstairs, a door slammed. Amber appeared at the top of the stairs, a suitcase in each hand, belly protruding between them. She froze when she saw James, eyes narrowing with suspicion. What's he doing here? She asked, voice tight. Before Michael could answer, the front door opened. All three turned, frozen in a tableau of guilt and surprise. Vanessa stood in the doorway, travel-worn but straight-backed, taking in the scene with calm appraisal. Her husband, his business partner, and a visibly pregnant woman standing on her staircase. I caught an earlier flight, she said, her voice eerily composed. Clearly, that was the right decision. Time seemed to stop. Michael felt suspended between heartbeats, between worlds that could no longer be kept separate. His past and present collided in a single devastating moment of clarity. Vanessa. His voice cracked on her name. What could he possibly say to bridge this chasm? She raised a hand, silencing him. Don't. There's nothing you can say. Her gaze moved to Amber, softening fractionally. I'm Vanessa Caldwell, though I suppose you already know that. Amber nodded, one hand moving protectively to her stomach. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant— I'm sure none of us meant for things to end this way, Vanessa interrupted, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. Her eyes moved to the suitcases. You're leaving? Yes. Amber glanced at Michael, uncertainty clouding her features. It's complicated. Vanessa's laugh held no humor. I imagine it is. She turned to James, who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floorboards. And you? What's your role in this little drama? Before James could answer, the sound of vehicles pulling up outside drew everyone's attention. Through the front window, black SUVs with government plates lined the street. Men and women in suits and windbreakers emblazoned with FBI approached the house. They're early, James whispered, face draining of color. Understanding dawned on Vanessa's face. This isn't just about an affair, is it? She turned to Michael, seeing him, truly seeing him, perhaps for the first time in years. What have you done? The doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a death knell. In that moment, with multiple lives balanced on the edge of ruin, Michael made the first genuine choice he'd made in years. He stepped past Vanessa and opened the door. Agent Torres stood on the porch, flanked by her team. "Michael Caldwell, we have a warrant to search these premises and to place you under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement." "I understand," Michael said, a strange calm settling over him. "I'll cooperate fully. But first, I need to tell you something." He turned to James, whose face had gone ashen. "The mastermind behind the Meridian Fund wasn't me. It was both of us, equal partners in everything." He met James's panicked gaze steadily. No more lies. No more running. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The house swarmed with agents. Computers were seized, documents boxed. Michael and James were handcuffed and led to separate vehicles. Through it all, Vanessa stood in the living room, a statue amid chaos. When Michael passed her on his way out, he paused. "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate but necessary. "For everything." Vanessa studied his face, searching for something. Was any of it real? Us? "Yes," Michael answered without hesitation. "That was the only real thing in my life. I just forgot it somewhere along the way." Something shifted in Vanessa's expression. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the first step toward understanding. "I'll visit you. Once, to say a proper goodbye." It was more than he deserved. As the FBI vehicle pulled away, Michael caught a final glimpse of the two women he'd entangled in his web of deception. Vanessa, straight-backed and dignified despite everything, and Amber, uncertainty and fear etched across her features as she cradled her unborn child. 2 lives forever altered by his choices. 3, counting the baby who would be born while he served his sentence. The weight of responsibility settled on Michael's shoulders, heavier than the handcuffs binding his wrists, but somehow less constraining. For the first time in years, he wasn't running or hiding or pretending. The truth, painful as it was, offered its own kind of freedom. The house disappeared from view as the car turned the corner. Michael closed his eyes, no longer afraid of what came next. The reckoning had arrived, and with it, the chance for something he'd abandoned long ago. Honesty, responsibility, perhaps, someday, redemption. The FBI agent driving the car glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there?" Michael opened his eyes to the future he'd earned. "No," he said simply, "but maybe someday I will be." The road stretched ahead, leading away from the ruins of the life he'd built on lies and toward whatever waited on the other side of consequences. Like a house built on sand, even the most elaborate deceptions cannot withstand the tide of truth. We create separate rooms in our lives thinking the walls between them will hold, but eventually every door must open. In the moment we stop running from who we truly are, even amidst the ruins, we find the foundation for something genuine. For now, that was enough. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of love to break down walls and bridge any divide. Please do comment your feedback and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of family, redemption, and the triumph of love over pride. Remember, it's never too late to change your story.